3 days before the company gala, I discovered a hastily deleted email chain, one where our new vice president, who always smiled like he was filming a toothpaste commercial, discussed removing me from the race right on stage. They thought they'd turn me into public entertainment, but they forgot one thing. I'd been playing this game longer than they realized, and I don't lose. Not when the entire company would be watching. Not when they'd handed me the perfect stage for their own destruction. My name is Emily Hart, and for 12 years, I'd been the backbone of Barton & Vale Consulting. At 38, I wasn't the oldest executive, but I was the one who knew where every skeleton was buried, every contract stored, every client's birthday, and their kids' names. I was the one people called when systems crashed at midnight or when million-dollar deals hung by a thread. Operations director might have been my title, but everyone knew I was the glue holding this place together. The trouble started the day Marcus Doyle walked through our glass doors. It was a Tuesday in September, one of those crisp mornings that made you believe in fresh starts. I'd arrived early, as always, making my rounds through the office with 2 coffees, one for me, one for whoever looked like they needed it most. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors I'd personally selected during our last renovation. That's when I saw him standing in what would become his corner office, arms crossed, surveying the city below like he'd already conquered it. Marcus Doyle, our new executive vice president of strategic innovation, whatever the hell that meant. The board had hired him from some Silicon Valley unicorn that had spectacularly imploded 6 months after going public. Naturally, he'd escaped with his reputation intact and a golden parachute that could have funded a small country. "You must be Emily," he said when I knocked. His smile so perfectly calibrated it could have been measured with a protractor. "I've heard you're the real CEO around here." It was meant to sound like a compliment, but I'd been in corporate America long enough to recognize a threat dressed in flattery. His handshake was firm, practiced, the kind they teach in those executive presence workshops. Everything about him screamed disruption, from his Allbirds sneakers paired with a Tom Ford suit to the standing desk he'd already had installed. "Welcome to Barton & Vale," I replied, matching his smile watt for watt. "If you need anything to get settled, just let me know." "Oh, I think I'll manage," he said, already turning back to his view. "I'm very good at settling in." Over the next few weeks, I watched Marcus work the office like a virus infiltrating a host. He scheduled coffee connects with every department head, threw around buzzwords like synergy and digital transformation until they lost all meaning. He'd walk the floors with his iPad, taking notes that no one ever saw, asking questions that seemed innocent but always probed just a little too deep. The first real sign something was wrong came from my desktop succulent. I'd kept that little cactus on my desk for 5 years. It was a Christmas gift from my team, a joke about how I was the only thing in the office tougher than a desert plant. I'd watered it religiously every Friday, watched it grow from a tiny nub to a respectable cluster of green. It had survived office moves, HVAC failures, and that time Jackson from IT accidentally knocked it off my desk. But 3 weeks after Marcus arrived, it started dying. The edges turned brown first, then yellow, spreading inward like something was poisoning it from the roots. I changed its position, adjusted the watering schedule, even bought special plant food. Nothing worked. Within a month, it was completely dead. "Shame about your plant," Marcus said one morning, appearing at my desk with his omnipresent tablet. "Sometimes things just can't adapt to new environments." He said it casually, but his eyes lingered on mine a beat too long. That's when I knew, really knew, that Marcus Doyle hadn't come to Barton & Vale to innovate anything. He'd come to clear the field, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The office atmosphere shifted like someone had changed the air pressure. Meetings that had been collaborative became performances. Longtime employees started updating their LinkedIn profiles. The break room conversations dropped to whispers whenever Marcus walked by. Even the coffee started tasting bitter, though that might have been my imagination. I'd survived 4 CEOs, 2 mergers, and 1 particularly nasty hostile takeover attempt. I'd weathered every storm this company had faced. And I'd be damned if I was going to let some Silicon Valley refugee with a fake smile and a hidden agenda take me down. As I sat at my desk that night, staring at the withered remains of my cactus, I made a decision. If Marcus Doyle wanted to play corporate games, he'd chosen the wrong opponent. I'd been here since the furniture was still being assembled. I knew every secret passage in this corporate maze, and unlike my poor succulent, I had no intention of withering away. Marcus's campaign started with honey, not vinegar. For the first month, he was everywhere I turned, complimenting my quarterly reports, praising my institutional knowledge, even bringing me artisanal coffee from that overpriced place downtown. "Emily, you're invaluable," he'd say, loud enough for others to hear. The real backbone of this operation, I should have known better. In corporate America, when someone calls you invaluable, they're usually calculating your replacement cost. The restructuring began in November. Marcus presented it to the board as Optimization 2.0, a revolutionary approach to leverage our human capital for maximum efficiency. The PowerPoint was gorgeous, all animated transitions and gradient backgrounds. The actual content was corporate butchery disguised as innovation. "We're not eliminating positions," he announced at the all-hands meeting, his smile never wavering. "We're evolving them." By evolving, he meant renaming everything until no one knew who did what anymore. My operations department became the Execution Excellence Hub. Sales became Revenue Acceleration. HR transformed into People Experience. It was like working in a corporate word salad, and in the confusion, he started making his moves. First, he transferred Sarah, my right hand for 7 years, to his newly created Strategic Initiatives Task Force. When I protested, he looked concerned. That practiced, theatrical concern that made me want to throw my laptop at his head. "Sarah specifically requested the move," he said, tilting his head sympathetically. "She felt she'd learned all she could in operations. We want to honor our employees' growth trajectories, don't we?" Sarah couldn't meet my eyes in the hallway after that. I knew Marcus had either promised her something spectacular or threatened something terrible. Maybe both. Next came the system access. One morning, I couldn't log into our financial planning software. IT said it was a permissions update that would be resolved soon. It took 3 weeks and 4 escalations to get it back. And by then, Marcus had already submitted the quarterly budget without my input. The meeting invitations stopped arriving. Not all at once. That would have been too obvious. First, I was accidentally left off the strategic planning session, then the vendor review. Then the board prep meetings I'd attended for a decade. Each time, Marcus would apologize profusely, blame his assistant, promise it wouldn't happen again. "You know how it is with new systems," he'd say with that infuriating smile. Sometimes things slip through the cracks. I started keeping a notebook, old school, paper and pen, locked in my desk drawer at home. Every slight, every accident, every reorganization that chipped away at my authority. The pattern was clear as a constellation once you connected the dots. Marcus was performing a corporate assassination in slow motion. Death by 1,000 administrative cuts. The weekly leadership meetings became particularly unbearable. Marcus would arrive 5 minutes late, apologizing with false sincerity, then dominate the conversation with buzzword bingo. "We need to pivot our paradigm," he'd say. Or, "Let's ideate on some blue sky thinking." Real issues, like our declining client satisfaction scores or the 3 major accounts showing signs of departure, were brushed aside for discussions about brand evolution and market disruption. During one December meeting, I tried to raise concerns about our Q1 planning timeline. Marcus cut me off mid-sentence. "Emily, I love your attention to detail," he said, his tone suggesting anything but love. "But we need to think bigger picture here. Sometimes being too focused on the weeds prevents us from seeing the forest." The room went quiet. Everyone knew I'd been managing successful Q1 launches since Marcus was probably still in business school, but no one said anything. That's when I realized how alone I'd become. The final insult came through email, or rather, the lack of it. I discovered by accident that there was a new leadership distribution list. SLT Core, that excluded exactly one person from the senior leadership team. Guess who? I found out when David from finance forwarded me something for visibility, not realizing I hadn't received the original chain. It was about the annual company Gala, the event I'd organized for the past 8 years. Marcus was taking over the planning, citing the need for fresh perspective and innovative approaches to stakeholder engagement. The gala where I was supposed to receive the Leadership Excellence Award. The gala that was 3 weeks away. That night, I sat in my office until the cleaning crew arrived. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent to corporate machinations. I pulled up the company directory on my personal laptop, the one IT couldn't monitor, and started mapping the new power structure Marcus had built. Every hired gun he'd brought in, every loyalist he'd converted, every neutral party he'd isolated. He'd been thorough. I'd give him that. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He thought I'd go quietly. If Marcus wanted to play dirty, I'd need intelligence. Real intelligence, not the sanitized garbage that flowed through official channels. I started arriving at 6 a.m. instead of 7, staying until the cleaning crew finished their rounds. Not to work harder, to work smarter. The first breakthrough came from the contract system. Marcus might have locked me out of financial planning, but he'd forgotten about the vendor management portal, probably because it was mind-numbingly boring. That's where I found the first irregularity. A consulting contract for $750,000 with Pinnacle Strategic Partners. The scope of work was vague enough to mean anything or nothing. The signature? Marcus Doyle. Dated 2 weeks after he'd joined. I cross-referenced Pinnacle Strategic Partners, Delaware LLC, formed 3 months ago. The registered agent's address led to a law firm that specialized in corporate anonymity. But the approval chain on the contract had one interesting name, Bradley Hutchinson, our CFO, who'd suddenly become very fond of Marcus's ideas in leadership meetings. I started building my shadow filing system. Everything went into encrypted folders on a personal drive, backed up to 2 separate cloud services, with a physical copy in a safety deposit box I'd rented across town. Paranoid? Maybe. But I'd seen too many executives get burned by thinking the company's systems were secure. The Gala budget was particularly illuminating. Marcus had increased it by 40%, citing elevated brand experience as justification. The venue cost had doubled, but when I called the hotel directly, pretending to be planning my own event, they quoted me the same price we'd paid last year. The difference, nearly $200,000, was allocated to event enhancement services from another company I'd never heard of, Apex Experience Design. Apex's website was professional but thin, created just 2 months ago according to domain records. The CEO's LinkedIn profile was equally new. But the company's registered address? The same building as Bradley Hutchinson's weekend apartment. I only knew about that apartment because Bradley's assistant, Teresa, had mentioned it during one of our coffee runs, back when I still had allies who talked to me. I documented everything meticulously. Screenshots, printouts, email chains, approval signatures. I used a coding system that would look like product SKUs to anyone who glanced at them. Marcus might have been playing chess, but I was building a legal case. The personnel moves told another story. Every new hire in Marcus's Strategic Initiatives Task Force came from companies that had one thing in common. They'd all gone through aggressive restructuring that resulted in massive layoffs. These weren't innovators, they were corporate executioners. Marcus was building a demolition crew, and I had a pretty good idea what they planned to demolish. Late one Thursday, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in the shared drive's archives was a draft press release dated for the day after the gala. It announced a bold new direction for Barton & Vale, including the elimination of the operations director role in favor of a distributed leadership model. My name wasn't mentioned, but then again, it wouldn't need to be. I started reaching out to my own network, carefully, quietly. Helen Price, who'd left the company 6 months ago under suspicious circumstances, met me at a coffee shop in Chinatown. Marcus tried the same thing with me, she said, stirring her tea methodically. But I didn't have proof. You're building a case? I nodded. Be careful. He's got friends on the board. Richard Steinberg specifically. They were at Wharton together. That explained why the board had hired Marcus despite his last company's spectacular failure. It wasn't about his track record, it was about his connections. Julian Cross from finance was my next contact. He'd been with the company for 15 years, survived every political storm by being aggressively neutral. But Marcus had made a mistake with Julian. He'd promoted Julian's incompetent nephew over Julian's own protégé. I can't give you anything official, Julian said during our accidental encounter at the parking garage. But if someone were to check the audit logs for system access between midnight and 3 a.m., they might find interesting patterns. Hypothetically speaking, I checked. Marcus's assistant had been accessing and downloading files at ungodly hours. Files that had nothing to do with strategic innovation, but everything to do with employee contracts, client relationships, and proprietary processes. They weren't just planning to fire me, they were mining my decade of institutional knowledge first. By the week before the gala, I had 3 bankers' boxes worth of evidence. Financial irregularities that bordered on embezzlement, nepotistic hiring practices, potential conflicts of interest that would make the SEC salivate. But evidence without an audience is just paper. That's when I remembered something CEO David Chen had said years ago during a town hall. My door is always open, but sometimes I learn more by walking through yours. David hadn't been to a gala in 3 years, preferring to stay at the company's Singapore headquarters. But he had a soft spot for tradition, and an even softer spot for catching executives who thought they were smarter than him. I composed the invitation carefully, from my personal email to his personal email, bypassing the corporate hierarchy entirely. Short, respectful, with just enough intrigue. The gala this year will be particularly memorable. Your presence would ensure the company's best interests are protected. His response came within an hour. I'll be there. Save me a seat with a good view. The confirmation came through the HVAC system. Of all things, our office had those old ventilation ducts that carried sound better than intended. I'd discovered this years ago when I could hear Brad from legal practicing his closing arguments 2 floors up. Usually, it was just white noise, keyboards clacking, phones ringing, the occasional burst of laughter. But that Wednesday afternoon, 3 days before the gala, I heard my name. I was reviewing contracts in the small conference room on the 7th floor, the one nobody used because the projector was broken and the AC was temperamental. Marcus's voice drifted down from the executive conference room directly above, clear as a bell through the ventilation grate. The timing has to be perfect, he was saying. Right after she receives the award, during her acceptance speech, maximum impact. Isn't that a bit theatrical? Bradley Hutchinson's nervous laugh followed. That's the point. We need to send a message. The old guard is done. Emily Hart represents everything wrong with this company: resistance to change, stuck in outdated processes, hoarding institutional knowledge like it's gold. When we sunset her position publicly, everyone will understand that no one is untouchable. Sunset. There it was. Corporate speak for execution. HR is prepared, Marcus continued. Conveniently scheduled for a compliance training that day. Another voice replied. Jennifer Walsh, our new chief people officer. Plausible deniability. They won't even know until Monday. And her access? I will cut everything the moment you give the signal. Email, systems, building entry, total lockout within 60 seconds. They laughed. Actually laughed, like they were planning a surprise party instead of professional humiliation. The severance package is insultingly low, Jennifer added. 3 months, basic COBRA, no acceleration of vesting equity. She won't fight it, not after being terminated for cause in front of 300 people. What cause? Bradley asked. Failure to adapt to evolving business needs. Marcus replied smoothly. Resistance to strategic initiatives. Creating a hostile environment for innovation. Take your pick. It's all documented in the performance improvement plan she doesn't know she's on. My hands were steady as I recorded everything on my phone. The old ventilation system that Marcus probably never even noticed had just handed me a gift. But I needed more than an audio recording that could be dismissed as edited or taken out of context. That evening, I stayed late again, waiting for the office to empty. At 9 p.m., I made my move. Marcus's assistant, Kevin, always left his computer logged in. I'd seen him do it dozens of times. Too lazy to deal with the two-factor authentication? His desk was just outside Marcus's office, positioned so Marcus could summon him with a gesture. The email trail was all there, hidden in a folder labeled Tax Documents 2019. Sloppy? Or arrogant? Maybe both. The messages painted a clear picture. Marcus had been planning this since his second week. He'd identified me as the primary obstacle to his complete takeover, called me a cultural antibody that needed to be excised before the real work could begin. There were discussions about who would absorb my responsibilities, Marcus himself, naturally, how to spin it to clients, even drafts of the announcement that would go out Monday morning. But the most damning email was from Richard Steinberg, board member and Marcus's Wharton buddy. Ensure the heart situation is handled with sufficient spectacle. We need others to understand that resistance to your vision has consequences. The Gala provides perfect staging. I forwarded everything to my personal email, then to my lawyer, then printed hard copies. As the printer hummed, I noticed something else in Kevin's files, the actual Gala run sheet. My award presentation was scheduled for 8:45 p.m., right after dinner, when everyone would be relaxed and unsuspecting. Marcus himself would call me to the stage, praise my years of service, hand me the crystal plaque. Then, according to a note in the margin, MD takes mic for transition announcement. They'd even assigned security to be near the stage, for crowd management during the transition. The note specified, they expected me to make a scene. They were counting on it. I sat back in Kevin's chair, staring at the screen. They'd thought of almost everything. The public humiliation, the locked accounts, the security presence, even the missing HR department. It was professionally ruthless, the kind of corporate assassination that would be whispered about for years. Almost everything. They hadn't counted on David Kim, CEO of our parent company, sitting in the audience. They hadn't counted on Helen Price, who still had friends on the board. They hadn't counted on Julian Cross, who'd already started his own investigation into the financial irregularities. And they certainly hadn't counted on me having 3 days to prepare my own show. I deleted all traces of my access from Kevin's computer, straightened his desk exactly as he'd left it, and walked back to my office. The city lights sparkled below, indifferent as always. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably selecting his tie for Saturday night, practicing his speech about innovation and transformation. Let him practice. Saturday night would indeed be transformative, just not the way he planned. The gala was in 72 hours. I had calls to make, documents to position, and a performance of my own to rehearse. Marcus wanted spectacle. He was about to get it. But first, I stopped by the 7th floor conference room and fixed the projector. It had been broken for 2 years, a convenient excuse to keep people away from my favorite listening post. Some things were worth protecting. My dignity, my reputation, and my career were definitely on that list. Thursday morning, 48 hours before the gala. I moved like a chess grandmaster setting up an endgame. First, the evidence. I packaged everything into 3 identical portfolios. Financial irregularities, the nepotistic hiring schemes, the email trails, the recorded conversation. One went into my safety deposit box. The second, I overnighted to my attorney with instructions to release to the SEC if anything happened to me. The third stayed in my briefcase, ready for Saturday night. Helen Price met me at a dim sum restaurant in Chinatown, the kind of place where the noise level made surveillance impossible. She slid a flash drive across the table between the Hargao and SU Mai. Everything from my exit, she said quietly, including the real reason I left. Marcus tried to force me to sign off on inflated quarterly projections. When I refused, he manufactured a compliance violation. The documentation is all there. Why didn't you fight it then? No proof. He was careful. But you? She smiled grimly. You've got him dead to rights. I've already sent a message to Margaret Chen on the board. She never liked Richard Steinberg anyway. She'll be watching Saturday night. Julian Cross was my next meeting, in the parking garage's blind spot between the security cameras. The audit trail is damning, he said, handing me a folder. Marcus has been routing payments through Pinnacle and Apex, then back to accounts controlled by his associates. It's not quite embezzlement, but it's close enough to trigger a full forensic audit. I've prepared a preliminary report, unofficial, of course. Of course. Emily, be careful. I heard Kevin booking first-class tickets to Dubai for Marcus. One way, leaving Sunday afternoon. So Marcus had an exit strategy. That meant he knew the scheme was risky, probably unsustainable. The gala wasn't just my execution, it was his grand finale before disappearing with whatever he'd already siphoned off. I spent Thursday evening crafting my contingency plans. If Marcus tried to cut me off during the award presentation, I needed alternatives. I contacted Tom from AV, who'd run tech for every gala since 2015. Hey Tom, weird request. Could you set up a backup mic on Saturday? One that runs through a separate board? Sure, but why? Remember when the main system crashed during Henderson's retirement speech? I just want to be prepared. Smart thinking. I'll have a wireless ready, different frequency. I'll keep the receiver at my station. Friday was about positioning. I sent individual messages to key allies, carefully worded. Looking forward to seeing you at the gala. I'll be receiving the Leadership Award at 8:45. Would love to have you close to the stage. I might have some important acknowledgments to make. Most confirmed they'd be there. The ones who didn't respond told me everything about where their loyalties now lay. I also reached out to contacts at our major clients, framing it as personal invitations to celebrate our partnerships. 4 CEOs confirmed attendance. Marcus would think twice about his public execution with client leadership watching. That afternoon, I had my final preparation, a visit to our chief legal counsel, Patricia Stern. Patricia was 6 months from retirement, untouchable, and had zero patience for corporate games. I need you to be at the gala tomorrow, I said, placing a sealed envelope on her desk. Don't open this unless something unexpected happens during my award presentation. She studied me over her reading glasses. Define unexpected. You'll know it when you see it. Emily, if you're planning something, I'm not planning anything, but others might be. I'd feel better knowing you're there with this information, just in case. She took the envelope, locked it in her desk drawer. I haven't missed a gala in 20 years. I won't start now. My final play was an email to David Kim, CEO of our parent company, sent from my personal account. David, thank you for confirming your attendance. I've reserved you a seat at table 2, directly in front of the stage. You mentioned wanting a good view. This is the best in the house. Also, I've attached some light reading about our recent strategic initiatives. Particularly interesting are the financial allocations on pages 12 to 15. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night. Emily. I attached Julian's preliminary audit report. David's response was brief, reviewed with great interest. Tomorrow should be educational. Friday night, I went home and tried on my dress for the gala. Black, elegant, authoritative. Not the soft blue I'd originally planned. This wasn't a celebration anymore. It was a battlefield, and I'd dress accordingly. I practiced my speech in the mirror. Not the acceptance speech I'd written weeks ago about gratitude and teamwork. A different speech. One about integrity, accountability, and what real leadership looked like when tested. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Security will be positioned at exits 2. They really don't want you to leave with dignity. A friend. So they'd expanded the containment plan. They wanted me trapped, humiliated, with no escape route. The image of a public execution was becoming more literal by the hour. I opened my laptop and made one last move. I scheduled an email to every member of the board, every major client, and 3 business journalists who'd covered our company. Set to send at exactly 8:50 p.m. Saturday, 5 minutes after my award was scheduled. The subject line: the real story behind tonight's events at Barton and Vale. If Marcus wanted to sunset me publicly, he'd better be prepared for what came after dark. I closed the laptop, poured a glass of wine, and raised it to the city lights. Here's to spectacle, I said to no one in particular. Tomorrow night, Marcus would learn what 12 years of institutional knowledge really meant. He thought he was producing a tragedy with me as the victim. He was about to discover he'd actually cast himself as the villain in someone else's triumph. The ballroom at the Riverside Hotel gleamed with calculated elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast perfect light on perfect people holding perfect champagne flutes. Ice sculptures shaped like our corporate logo slowly melted into metaphors I tried not to think about. The string quartet played something classical and forgettable, the kind of music designed to fill silence without demanding attention. I arrived at precisely 7:15, fashionably on time, but not eager. My black dress moved like liquid shadow as I walked through the entrance, past the security Marcus had so thoughtfully arranged. They nodded at me, probably not knowing they'd been positioned to contain me later. "Emily," Barbara from marketing rushed over, champagne already flushing her cheeks. "You look stunning. So excited about your award tonight." "Thank you, Barbara," I smiled, noting how her eyes didn't quite meet mine. She knew something. They all did. Probably. The corporate rumor mill was too efficient for Marcus's plan to be completely secret. The room filled steadily. I worked it like I always had, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, pretending not to notice the uncomfortable glances and whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, though I doubt anyone except Marcus's inner circle knew exactly what they were anticipating. At 7:45, I saw David Kim enter, and the room's energy shifted. Parent company CEOs didn't usually attend subsidiary events. His presence was like dropping a shark into a tank of tropical fish. Everyone suddenly swam with purpose. He caught my eye, nodded almost imperceptibly, and took his seat at table 2, exactly where I'd placed him. Marcus appeared at 8:00, working the room with his usual manufactured charm. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his smile perfectly practiced. He looked like James Bond. If James Bond sold corporate consulting instead of saving the world. Jennifer Walsh and Bradley Hutchinson flanked him like lieutenants, their own smiles slightly more nervous. "Emily," Marcus's voice carried across the room as he approached. "Our woman of the hour, how are you feeling?" "Never better, Marcus." I let him air kiss my cheek, noting the slight sheen of perspiration on his forehead. "It's going to be an unforgettable evening." "Indeed it is." His eyes glittered with anticipation. "Indeed it is." The lights dimmed at 8:30, signaling dinner service. I sat at the head table, positioned between our CFO and the head of HR who'd conveniently returned from his training just in time for the meal. The salmon was perfect, not that I tasted it. I was too busy watching the room, noting positions, tracking who was drinking heavily and who stayed sharp. Patricia Stern, our chief legal counsel, sat at table 4 with a clear sightline to the stage. She patted her purse. The envelope was there. Helen Price had somehow secured a seat at table 6, close enough to the board members' table to be interesting. Julian Cross worked the room with his phone out, apparently showing photos of his new grandchild, but actually documenting attendance. At 8:40, the lights dimmed again. Marcus took the stage, tapping the microphone with theatrical flair. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a spectacular evening." Applause rippled through the room. I stood, smoothing my dress, and moved toward the stage's side entrance. Security shifted, subtle but noticeable, blocking potential exits. The trap was set. "Tonight, we celebrate excellence," Marcus continued, his voice honey-smooth through the sound system. "We celebrate dedication. We celebrate those who've helped build Barton and Vale into what it is today." More applause. I was at the stairs now, waiting in the wings. Tom from AV caught my eye from his station, tapped his equipment. The backup mic was ready. "It's my distinct honor to present this year's Leadership Excellence Award to someone who truly embodies our company's values. Someone who's been with us for over a decade. who knows every corner of this organization. His pause was perfectly timed, his smile widening as he found me in the shadows. Ladies and gentlemen, Emily Hart. The applause was thunderous as I climbed the stairs. The spotlight hit me like a physical force, transforming my black dress into something that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I walked to center stage, accepting the crystal plaque from Marcus with a smile that could have frozen champagne. "Thank you, Marcus," I said into the microphone, my voice steady as steel. "This is quite an honor." He stepped back but didn't leave the stage, positioning himself for his moment. The security guards moved closer to the stairs. Someone dimmed the house lights further, focusing all attention on the stage. "I've prepared a speech," I continued, pulling index cards from my clutch. "But recent events have inspired some revisions." Marcus's smile flickered. This wasn't in his script. "You see, leadership isn't just about the good times. It's about what you do when someone tries to sunset you." The room went silent. Marcus stepped forward, reaching for the mic. I shifted smoothly to the backup Tom had activated, my voice now coming through different speakers. 3 days ago, I discovered something interesting through our office ventilation system. 3 days ago, I discovered something interesting through our office ventilation system, I continued, my voice crystal clear through Tom's backup speakers. A conversation about sunsetting me publicly, right here, during my acceptance speech. The audience shifted, a collective intake of breath. Marcus lunged for the main microphone controls, but Tom had already killed his feed. "Marcus." I turned to face him directly, still amplified. "Would you like to tell everyone about your plans, or should I?" His face had gone pale, then red. He strode toward me, hand outstretched for my microphone. I stepped back, maintaining distance. "Security," he barked. "There's been a disruption." "Yes, there has." David Kim's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood at table 2, commanding attention without raising his voice. "But not the one you planned, Mr. Doyle." The security guards froze, uncertain. They worked for Barton and Vale, but David Kim signed their parent company's checks. I continued, pulling the folded papers from my clutch. "Let me share what Marcus planned for tonight. A public termination, disguised as a transition announcement, HR conveniently absent, security positioned to prevent me from leaving with dignity, even my system access to be cut within 60 seconds. Gasps rippled through the room. Client CEOs leaned forward. Board members exchanged glances. But that's just the beginning. I unfolded Julian's report. Should we discuss Pinnacle Strategic Partners, Marcus, the $750,000 contract for services that don't exist, or Apex Experience Design, which inflated our Gala budget by $200,000? These are baseless accusations, Marcus started. With documented evidence, Patricia Stern announced, standing with the envelope I'd given her now open, which I've just reviewed. As chief legal counsel, I'm obligated to report potential financial irregularities to the board immediately. Margaret Chen from the board stood next. "Mr. Doyle, I think you should stop talking. Anything you say now could be used in the forensic audit we'll be launching Monday morning." The room erupted. Phones appeared, recording everything. Marcus looked around wildly, searching for allies. But Bradley Hutchinson had somehow vanished, and Jennifer Walsh was already edging toward the exit. Furthermore, I continued, raising my voice over the chaos. I have email evidence of this entire scheme, including correspondence from board member Richard Steinberg, encouraging Marcus to make my termination sufficiently spectacular as a warning to others. Richard Steinberg shot to his feet. "This is preposterous." "Is it?" David Kim pulled out his phone. "Because I received Emily's documentation yesterday. Every contract, every email, every financial discrepancy. Legal will need months to sort through it all, but what I've seen is enough." He walked toward the stage with the measured pace of someone who owned the room. "Mr. Doyle, your employment with Barton and Vale is terminated immediately. Security, the real security, not the ones you positioned. Please escort Mr. Doyle from the premises. His company access has already been revoked." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The 60-second system lockout Marcus had planned for me had just been executed on him instead. "You can't," Marcus sputtered. "I have a contract, which includes a morality clause and provisions against financial malfeasance." Patricia added helpfully, "I'm sure you remember. You insisted on adding those clauses yourself." Two uniformed security officers, ones I recognized from the building's main team, not Marcus's plants, approached the stage. Marcus looked at me with pure venom. "You think you've won," he hissed, just loud enough for me to hear. "You're still just a relic. This company needs transformation." "What this company needs," David Kim said, now on stage, "is leaders who build rather than destroy, who elevate rather than eliminate, who understand that institutional knowledge isn't a threat, it's an asset." He turned to the audience, his voice carrying without a microphone. "I apologize for the disruption to your evening, but I want to be clear, anyone involved in this scheme will be investigated. Anyone who knew and stayed silent will be reviewed. Barton and Vale will not tolerate corruption, regardless of how it's packaged." The security officers reached for Marcus's arms. He shook them off, straightening his tuxedo with the last shreds of his dignity. "I'll see you in court," he said to me. "I'm counting on it," I replied. "Discovery should be fascinating." He walked off the stage, the officers flanking him. The room watched in absolute silence as he crossed the ballroom, his Italian leather shoes clicking against marble in a funeral march of his own making. The doors closed behind him with a definitive thud. David Kim turned to me, extending his hand. "Ms. Hart, I believe you had an acceptance speech to give." I looked out at the audience, shocked faces, recording phones, whispered conversations. This wasn't the evening anyone had expected, least of all me. "Actually," I said, taking the microphone one more time, "I think I've said everything that needed to be said, except this. Leadership isn't about power. It's about protecting what matters. And what matters here is integrity." The applause started slowly, then built to thunder. People stood, first one table, then another, until the entire room was on its feet. I walked off that stage not as a victim of corporate assassination, but as someone who'd refused to go quietly into that good night. Marcus had wanted spectacular. He got it. The ballroom slowly returned to life, though the energy had fundamentally shifted. Conversations were hushed, urgent. Phones glowed as people texted and emailed, spreading the news beyond these walls. I stood beside the stage, accepting handshakes and words of support that felt surreal after weeks of isolation. "Emily," David Kim approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "Walk with me." We stepped onto the terrace overlooking the city. The December air was sharp, cleansing after the charged atmosphere inside. "You took quite a risk," he said, not unkindly. "If you'd been wrong about any of this." "But I wasn't." He smiled, a real smile, not the corporate version. "No, you weren't. The board will meet Monday. Richard Steinberg has already submitted his resignation, hoping to avoid prosecution. We'll need someone to lead the restructuring, the real kind, not Marcus's version. I just want my job back. You'll have it. With a promotion, Executive Vice President of Operations. We need someone who understands both the history and the future." I sipped the champagne, feeling its bubbles rise like tiny victories. "And the others? Bradley, Jennifer?" "Under investigation. Bradley's already lawyered up. Jennifer's claiming she was coerced. The forensic accountants will sort out the truth." Through the glass doors, I could see the party continuing. Helen Price was talking animatedly with board members. Julian Cross was showing Patricia Stern something on his laptop. Tom from AV was packing up his equipment, but not before several people stopped to shake his hand. "You know what the ironic part is?" I said. "Marcus was right about one thing. The company did need transformation, just not his kind." David nodded. "Real transformation builds on what works while fixing what doesn't. It doesn't require destroying people." We returned to the ballroom. The string quartet had resumed playing, though fewer people were dancing. I made my rounds, thanking allies, noting enemies, already thinking about Monday morning. Near midnight, as the event wound down, I found myself alone at the head table. The Crystal Award sat there, catching the light. Leadership excellence. Marcus had meant it to be my professional tombstone. Instead, it had become something else entirely. Sarah, my former right hand who'd been transferred to Marcus's team, approached hesitantly. Emily, I'm so sorry. He promised me, threatened me. I didn't know what to do. I know, I said, and meant it. Marcus was good at finding pressure points. We'll talk Monday. She nodded, tears threatening her mascara, and disappeared into the thinning crowd. I gathered my things, the award, my clutch with its cargo of evidence that was no longer needed. The security guards who'd been positioned to contain me were gone. The stage where my professional execution was supposed to occur stood empty, its lights dimmed. As I walked through the lobby, my heels echoing on marble, I thought about Marcus on his way to the airport, probably calculating his next move from Dubai. He'd resurface somewhere, men like him always did, but not here, not anymore. The valet brought my car, a sensible sedan that Marcus had probably sneered at. I drove through the city streets, past the office building where I'd spent 12 years building something worth protecting. The lights were off except for the security floor. By Monday, they'd blaze again with purpose. Real purpose, not corporate theater. I pulled into my driveway at 1 a.m. The house was dark, quiet, a sanctuary after the battle. I set the Crystal Award on my kitchen counter and poured myself a proper drink. Whiskey. Neat. None of that champagne pretense. My phone buzzed with messages. Congratulations. Support. Even a few apologies from people who'd chosen the wrong side. One stood out, an unknown number with a Dubai country code. This isn't over. I deleted it without responding. It was over. Marcus just didn't know it yet. I raised my glass to the empty kitchen, to the succulent that had died on my desk, to every professional woman who'd been told she was resistant to change when she was actually resistant to bullshit. Here's to not going quietly, I said to no one and everyone. The whiskey burned warm down my throat. A reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't just success, it's refusing to be anyone's victim, even when they've built the perfect stage for your destruction. Monday morning would come soon enough, bringing lawyers and auditors and the hard work of real transformation. But tonight, in the quiet of my kitchen, with my integrity intact and my enemies in flight, I allowed myself one moment of pure satisfaction. Marcus had wanted to sunset me. Instead, he'd learned what happens when you try to eclipse someone who's been navigating in the dark for years. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, I'd sleep the deep sleep of someone who'd faced professional assassination and lived to tell the tale. The corporate world could be brutal, but it had taught me one invaluable lesson. When someone tries to bury you publicly, make sure you're not the one who ends up underground. The city lights twinkled through my bedroom window, indifferent as always to the small dramas of corporate life. But somewhere out there, in boardrooms and break rooms, my story would be told. Not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win, even if they have to fight dirty to do it. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and justice served cold. I'm curious, where are you listening to this story right now? Are you on your commute, at home, or perhaps taking a break at work? Drop a comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed this tale of office politics and sweet revenge, please subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and share your thoughts about Emily's journey. What would you have done in her situation? Let's discuss in the comments.